Thanks so much, everyone, for being here. Welcome to our penultimate Collective Models working group meeting. This is a collaboration between the Farmland Access Hub's Collective Models working group and the SARE Equitable Tenure cohort. We've been doing presentations, just as a refresher, over the last several months. I think our first was in January or February. Lots of familiar faces here. And so we've been really excited to be sort of co-learning and building capacity together related to different collective land examples and models, and just kind of learning about this whole space. We have several of our collaborative partners on the call today. Katie Kobovchik, Gary Hampton, Jean Willoughby, Kara Komodo is helping us out as well. I'm probably missing some others, but I just wanted to thank some of our organizing team here. I know several people already were putting their names and location in the chat, but if you're just joining us, if you want to go ahead and put your name and location in the chat, that would be great. Feel free to share your pronouns as well if you feel comfortable. So today I think I'm going to help facilitate, but I don't really want to spend too much time talking at this point. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers this morning. We're delighted to have a session related to cooperatives, which has been a topic that's come up a lot of different times in different ways throughout this series. And so today we're focusing not only on cooperatives as their own model, but on sort of the principles of cooperatives that might apply to a wide variety of different types of collective organizing. Super excited for that presentation. And for that, we're going to welcome Gary Hampton from Renewing the Countryside and the Ajani Group, Collie Graddick from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and Kelly Maynard from the UW Center for Cooperatives. They have excellent bios that we shared in the last email. I'll go ahead and put those in the chat, but I think I will not read them formally right now because that might take a while and I'm sick of hearing my own voice. So with that, I think I'm just going to hand it over to the team and you all can introduce yourselves more if you'd like.
All righty. Thank you, Katie. I'm Gary Hampton, as Katie mentioned, with Renewing the Countryside and with the Ajani Group. Also, I'm working with Agrarian Trust on this SARE grant as well. And so I'm involved in co-ops. I chair Association of Cooperative Educators, and I co-manage the Urban Ag Initiative with RTC. And so I will pass it on to Kelly.
Gary, so I'm a co-op development specialist, my official title, with the Center for Cooperatives based at UW-Madison. We're part of the Division of Extension there. And what that means for the most part is that I help people start new cooperatives. We have a team of us that do that, and we do that work across a wide range of types of cooperatives and sectors. I'm the person on our co-op developer team that tends to focus in the food and agriculture space. Though I have done some work in the past, over a decade ago, that had some connection to land access, and kind of newly back into thinking about farmland access and then how the co-op model might apply in that space. So.
Okay. My name is Collie Graddick. I'm an agricultural consultant with Minnesota Department of Agriculture. I presently am in rural Georgia, so I work remotely. My co-op I'm a partner in the table association of cooperatives, which is a small organization in for some years with farmers and trying to organize them to market. My father was a founding member of the West Georgia Farmers Cooperative, which was one of the founding cooperatives of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. And so I've been in the cooperative movement for about 65 years. And so here in Georgia and Alice Cooperative and the West Georgia Young Farmers, heirs and descendants of the West Georgia Farm. If you heard that, then I'll stop with that and try to get in a better location for my connection as well.
Thank you, Collie. We did catch some of that, most of it.
Yes, we appreciate it, Collie. Thank you, Katie. So as we get started, and we're talking about the cooperative intersection with agriculture and farming, there's a few questions. Many times people don't know what a co-op is. So as we go through this, we're going to drop some questions in the chat for open-ended responses, as well as we guide through this conversation. So the first question is, do you know what a co-op is? And so if you could just take a moment and enter in the chat, what is a cooperative? If your understanding of what a cooperative is, I'd appreciate it. So what is a cooperative? Cooperative is a business that is owned and democratically controlled by the people who uses its services. It's member-owned, member-controlled, member benefits. And this is the International Cooperative Alliance's use for this definition. A cooperative is an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. And with that is every member has a vote. Every member has a voice. And as we get into agriculture, you bring people collectively on land. That's going to be part of the stewardship pathway and part of the governance. And so co-ops are very much principled and centered around 7 principles. If you could in the chat, just drop down what principles, or if you know of any of the co-op principles, if you could enter those into the chat for me, that would be great.
Gary, just before I move to the next slide, I went looking at some of the answers to the first question.
Yes.
I just wanted to kind of add, so we, people, a group of individuals, members who own a business together, someone mentioned, and sometimes the workers. And so the cooperative structure can encompass quite a wide range of businesses in just about any sector in the economy. And one of the ways that you can differentiate between types of cooperatives is who those member owners are. And so in the agricultural space, we tend to think about what we call producer-owned cooperatives. So the producers, the farmers, own the business together, and it is providing them with a range of goods or services that they need to be successful in their businesses. Worker-owned cooperatives are a whole world of co-ops, and so that is a case where the worker owners of the business, and I mean this could be any kind of business. This could be a roofing business, a painting business, a landscape company, a home, providing home care, but the employees of the business are also the owners of that business. And then there are consumer cooperatives, a lot of the grocery cooperatives that, if you are familiar with those, credit unions, rural electrics, those are all the people who are buying the things from the co-op, the goods or services that the co-op sells are the ones who are the member owners. And then there are examples, depending on the state you're in and what's allowed by the laws in that state, there are examples of what we call hybrid or multi-stakeholder, where you have more than one class or type of ownership in that co-op. But so yes, so there are, it covers it's a big tent, co-ops.
Yes, very much true. Thank you, Kelly. And so as Kelly was saying, that it goes across a number of different sectors as well. And I think in addition it's really only limited to how we want to apply the cooperative model as well. And so as we continue on, these businesses are principled. And so there's 7 principles, as you can see on this wheel, and beginning at the top is voluntary and open membership. Um, so it's open to individuals normally that are interested. There's many times an onboarding process, etc., that allows people to become members. You have membership opportunities such as with your co-op grocers or even with your credit unions. Many people that are a member of a credit union are a cooperative member already, whether they know it or not. Democratic member control, 2. 1 member, 1 vote, and also some of the things that you're also seeing within that democratic space is the reference to utilization of sociocracy as well in conjunction with that democratic membership and control. And then member economic participation. And so that's a pathway for every member gets a path towards participation, possible reciprocity, and remuneration as well. And then autonomy and independence is number 4. And then number 5 is education and training, very much at the core and undergirding of bringing awareness to co-ops, as well as looking at workforce and economic development. In the case of farming, it could be those things, those skills, et cetera, necessary around that particular sector. And then cooperation among cooperatives is P6, and that's individual cooperators or cooperatives, et cetera, working together and mutually supporting one another in common purpose and shared work, which will be required in governing and working on farmland, et cetera, as well. And then concern for community is number 7, and that's looking at meeting and filling the gaps and needs of the communities in which the cooperators and cooperatives serve as well. And so, with farming and agriculture, it intersects with the co-op ecosystem when we start looking at food sovereignty. We start looking at possibly sourcing cooperative grocery stores, et cetera, and then also in how we build community and work together in a cooperative way through trust towards those pathway of collaboration. So, Kelly and Collie, do you all want to contribute anything around these principles before we step onto the next slide real quick?
I was just going to say one thing that I like to mention when I show people these 7 principles. Principles 1, 2, and 3 kind of get to the core definition of what a co-op is. I think one of the things that is key in terms of thinking about it being member-owned, controlled, and benefited is it's different than like a nonprofit or an investor-owned business. The co-op is designed to provide goods or services that the members need, and so that member economic participation is key, both in the terms of like getting the co-op going and funding it, and then making sure that it is providing the things that you need. That's what it's designed to do. And then that's how you also share potentially in profits. Principles 5, 6, and 7, there's been research that shows that co-ops that choose to, that make an emphasis to prioritize these things, education and training, this can be for your membership, for your board of directors, out in the community, that, P6 and P7, co-ops that stand the test of time, right? That have longevity as businesses we see evidence of them really focusing on those on P5, 6, and 7. There's this recognition that like as of this democratic group controlled enterprise, like these particularly the education and training piece is super important on an ongoing basis. Like you never know everything there is to know about working well in a group of people. And then, that being able to work with others, co-ops and work with the community. So, it's great to see that like these being principles that co-ops have embraced, also the principles are things that tend to, and at a large, kind of collective data scale, lead to success and longevity.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Collie, do you have anything you want to contribute?
Yes, I'll just say, in addition to those principles and the years and experience that I've had in organizing cooperatives, there are probably three principles that are unwritten that I found out that really needs to be a part of any organizing. That's transparency, equity, and trust. And the transparency part should be about everything that goes on in the co-op, especially the financials part of it, and then the equity, that's every one person, one vote, no matter how much funding that you have or you put in the co-op, and trust. And trust is probably one of the most difficult parts of being a part of a cooperative, because that trust has to go beyond and into and with every member in the cooperative. And when things start happening, that's where I've seen in the past where problems seems to arise, and also about how co-ops are started, and there needs to be a collective group that starts a cooperative, or at least it needs to be more than just one person's idea, because that equity piece. When someone says that I want to start a co-op, then you have to understand, or at least that person have to understand, that they have to give up a lot of, if you want to call it, control, because you basically are saying that I'm equal to everybody, even though it may be your idea or whatever. But the equity piece is very important, and it has to be a part of the founding piece. And like I said, it's not necessarily one of and it's embedded in the principles, but I always like to talk about transparency, equity, and trust.
Okay, thank you. Many times when I think of co-ops, I think about that cooperation being that trust that leads to the collaboration or transformation or change or advancement of that collective or common purpose. So thank you for highlighting those, Collie, because those are definitely essential to cooperatives and working together in collective ways. So if you could go on to the next slide for me, as we continue this conversation, as we get into talking about sharing the land and sharing resources, et cetera, how do we govern ourselves? How do we help make decisions and be great stewards together? And so within co-ops, members elect a board and approve changes to the bylaws. Then there's the board of directors that sets policy, selects, and supervises management. And then there's the management that carries out these policies, hires and supervises employees. And then the employees carry out the tasks needed to operate the cooperative. And so as we look at governance and in regards to cooperative and collective land holding access, Collie, could you give some insight on your experiences with governance and its application to farming and agriculture within the co-op space?
Can I offer a couple things, Gary? And then Collie, let us know if you're able to unmute or get back.
Yes, please go ahead. That's perfect.
So this, in a lot of co-ops, certainly the co-ops that I support and that, Gary works with and maybe Collie works with, this structure, governance structure here, it's, for really large cooperatives with lots of members, this is like pretty typically what happens. They're representative democracies. And so, you have this larger membership base selecting the board. There is, there are, staff, usually more than one person. right, doing all of these things. But there's a lot of co-ops that are quite small. And so one of the words that we like to use, or phrases we like to use when talking about co-op governance in a really small co-op, is like, what hat are you wearing at any given time? So in like a small worker-owned co-op, sometimes you only have 5 or 6 members, and all of those members are by default on the board of directors. And if it's a worker co-op, they are the employees, right? They are the managers and the employees. And so a lot of this gets to, like, at any given moment, what hat am I wearing? Am I wearing my hat as a member, and what I'm getting from being a member of this co-op? Am I making a decision about together with my fellow directors about the co-op as a whole? Or am I managing or helping run the day-to-day business, whatever that might be? And I think certainly as I've thought about how the co-op model might apply in some sort of collective land access, land ownership piece, it's in my mind is certainly, I don't have a concrete example yet. It's this, but it would probably be a small group of people, right? So maybe it's half a dozen farmers who decide to form a co-op together, and that co-op purchases a piece of land. And then as a group, they are the members, and maybe that same entire membership is making the decisions, all of them, about how that land gets managed. They might have their own enterprises on that land, but then there's some things that happen jointly. Maybe there's shared infrastructure, shared investment. They do some activities together, some joint marketing, whatever. There are a lot of possibilities. And they may or may not, in that scenario, they may or may not need to hire any employees or managers, right? I mean, maybe they collectively pay somebody a little bit to, if there's like need with upkeep on that land or something like that. So, this structure can be broadly applicable, and sometimes all the people fill all the roles, or a lot of the people fill all the roles, and you just start thinking about those hats. And I think in contrast to some of the models that we have talked about, and I've certainly been learning about, like learning a lot about the different, trust models and land conservancies and things that are involved in this space. I think one of the things that's really, that I like about the co-op model, it's certainly a challenging piece of it, is that so many of and it's not bad, but in so many of these, a lot of us work for nonprofits, right? And your nonprofit has a board. And the work of and that board is sometimes, it's great people, but it's not necessarily the people for whom that are receiving the goods or services of what or the target kind of audience of what that nonprofit is doing. And in the co-op space, it's one and the same, right? Like, it's not this like kind of separate board over here making decisions. It's the people that if it were a land co-op working on the land, farming together, then are also in the position of making the decisions together as that board.
And this is Collie. I'm back. Sorry, I missed that. Other parts trying to get in a better space to get things working. But I would like to say just about the governance model. They say the thing that I like about cooperative is that when you use the word cooperative and say cooperative, it's a universal term that no matter where you go in the world, as you say cooperative, people understand what you're talking about. They may not know maybe whether it's a farming cooperative or a housing cooperative or whatever. They know that the governance is around people coming together to do something for economic purpose. Most states have laws that govern cooperatives. They are usually part of the, I think it's called the annotated code of the state statutes. And that's the other thing I like about cooperatives, that every state has some laws in place that tells you how you govern a cooperative. Most states say you have to have at least 5 people to sign an article of incorporation. And that puts that cooperative in an equal balance. You can have more than 5, but it's usually a minimum of 5 people that come together. Some states basically say if you're going to be a farming cooperative, that all of your members, your founding members, or all of your members have to be farmers. For example, the co-op that my father started, he started out as the Harris County Farmers Cooperative, but as they expanded into doing more than just farming, they got into garment making. So when they reorganized it with the West Georgia Cooperative Association, because all of the members and investors weren't farmers, and so, but each state has different statutes. The main thing is that you have an article of incorporation, and along with that, that article of incorporation would say you have bylaws, and so that's governance. And so there's a legal way when you say cooperative. There's some legal, I guess, grounds that you can stand on that you have to follow to say that you are a cooperative. And so that's the other thing that I like about the governance of the cooperative model.
Thank you, Collie. And something else with the governance. And many times I hear this in the space as well when it comes to the governance is distributed leadership. And that leadership is more linear versus top down, as you see in traditional structures. So I just kind of want to point that out. And as we look at like the commons approach to collective land holdings and cooperative farming, cooperation is at the heart of both of those. And so there's this application of cooperation into the commons that seems very natural to me, and is, I think, a pathway towards how folks steward and share and work on the land. So Kelly and Collie, what are some of the key considerations for collective organizing as you look at cooperative and collective land holding access?
I think so. Collie mentioned that, most states, although not all, have some sort of in their statutes, legal statutes, a specific one that's about cooperatives, right? And so, but every states are a little bit different. And so first, if it's like looking at what is allowed in your state, and so then like in terms of a legal structure, like what can you do with this type of model? And also, this has, I know, come up. This is in terms of the thinking that I'm doing with Mia on writing a guide about this for Wisconsin. You've got the like legal structure defined by statute that makes that can form the co-op, and then there's like what's allowed but vis-a-vis other state laws. Laws, there's can be some it's not maybe a full roadblock, but things to consider around like corporate ownership of farmland. So in Wisconsin, a co-op is considered a type of corporation, and so there are limits on corporate ownership of farmland. Thinking about if a group of people is coming together for collective ownership of farmland, are they thinking about housing in addition to that? And then like what is allowed zoning wise? So there's a lot of these kind of nitty gritty considerations, but I would say that, big picture, and Gary and Collie, you both mentioned this, when a group comes together, being really crystal clear that the goal, that there is a common goal, a common vision, and that things get written down. I think you can't really rush the beginning part of cooperative organizing, which is making sure that group of people, whatever they're setting out to do together, is really kind of has gelled, and that they've worked to figure out what are their processes for decision making. How do they meet? How do they have discussions? How do they navigate conflict? Because anytime you've got two people, there will be conflict, two or more people, so that's inevitable. And so it's just like understanding that they've got process to move through that. I work with a lot of groups that have a lot of cooperative ideas, and you can't really rush that, making sure that group process piece is together, and that you write down a lot of things. Collie mentioned you've got your articles of incorporation. That's usually a pretty simple document that gets filed at the state level. Your bylaws are kind of like your constitution, but then you might have any other number of kinds of agreements, policies, things like that, and that just get to that bit about transparency and clarity and expectation amongst the group. And yeah, to me, that's what I spend a lot of time working with groups on, whatever the cooperative business proposition is. And I see that being completely still relevant in this context.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to mention about land ownership, cooperatives are in almost every state, they're nonprofit. They're not necessarily 501c3 because your profits are, the co-op itself should not be looking to make a profit. Everything should be passed through to the membership based on their participation in the cooperative. But I want to say in land ownership and property ownership and things, because cooperatives are nonprofit, they have to abide by some state nonprofit statutes. And for example, if they, I was in a nonprofit, if you dissolve that nonprofit or decide to end in your co-op and you own land, that land has to go to another nonprofit. And I think that's through nonprofit law property. I'm not sure whether you'd be able to sell it and then distribute those funds to the membership prior to dissolving the organization. But I was part of another.
That varies by state. Like I think in Wisconsin.
Right. Yes. And so so you want to look into that as a cooperative, as you buy property. Do you actually put it in the name of the cooperative, because the cooperative is a nonprofit, and so how does that nonprofit statute on that state would affect what you're doing?
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, I think as you all are speaking, I think about the trust element. Just being able to come together to work on the land, the common purposes, the common missions, and different things of that nature, to be good stewards. And then is continuing to look at, like, what does that redistribution, that equity redistribution look like for those people, farmers on the land, producers on the land, and that sustainability. So you all gave me some things to think about. So what are your thoughts around what I just mentioned, and around those elements of that question, and my thoughts as far as sustainability, the equity redistribution through the land, et cetera, when it comes to sharing and stewardship of the land? What are your thoughts around that? Or do you have any thoughts around it?
Are you asking me and Collie?
Either one of you all, just whoever I did. I'm sorry.
Well, I think, as I've been, thinking about how to, this guide that Mia and I are working on, and how we would frame things, at least in the legal context for Wisconsin, I think just this equity question, right? I mean, I think that there's, and then I also think about this so I live in a rural township in Wisconsin. I'm actually in conversations with my people on my town board about potentially getting on the land use committee, right? So down at these very, very local levels, right, you've got groups of people who are revising and implementing land use plans, and there's all these very, very local rules. And I think about I live in a township that has pretty standard, for the most part, agriculture, where it's there's pretty strict limitations on development, so it's not being sold for subdivisions. But then you've got these larger farms that are people aging out, and there may not be someone, right, that wants to come in and buy a couple hundred acres to row crop it, right? And so thinking about the kind of the kind of equity that a beginning farmer or small farmer could come in with, and then what is the scale of land that, if they pooled resources with another small group, what is the scale that of something they could access realistically financially? But also then recognizing that one of the ways that in part of an individual farm enterprise, one of the ways that you grow, access capital, forms of financing is by having a certain amount of equity. And so that whether that in the business, in land, things like that. And so one of the things, the hope is that, being able to demonstrate equity in a portion of a piece of land, maybe not a whole 100 acres or, a 40 or whatever, but be able to say, I have an X amount of equity and it's on the books of my farm business, and I can leverage that equity towards, investment in machinery or, something else that my business needs. Is that having this business model that allows you to demonstrate that could play, a good, there's possibility there. And that, that recognition that kind of, to Collie's point about the purpose of a co-op is not profit. For the most part, most co-ops are not 501c3s in the way we think about nonprofits, but the purpose is not profit. And so one of the mechanisms that exists in the housing co-op world is essentially the co-op agreeing to limit the value gain on property in terms of future thinking to like member turnover. So in the housing co-op world, these are called limited equity housing cooperatives, and the same model could be applied in land, and that you kind of agree, we're going to allow some nominal amount of like gain in value of my portion of this land that I'm sharing, so that I, if I farm on here for, 10 years, 15 years, whatever, like there is some gain that I see if eventually a new member comes on, but we're not going to allow it to be at market rate, right? We're going to agree that amongst ourselves as a co-op, that in order to keep this accessible and allow new members to come in the future, that we're there are formulas and other things, and we are gonna as a group agree like what my value of my piece is and how much it can gain over time, so that as a business owner, I see a little bit of equity gain, but there's still this accessibility piece that's built in. I don't know if that gets at what you were asking, Gary, but that's what I think about equity when I think about this.
Excellent. Collie, do you have any insight on that at what Kelly was saying? Or anything to add?
When it comes to property, land ownership, I'll use the example of our co-op in Alabama, East Alabama Black Farmers Cooperative that we started a few years ago. We don't necessarily own any land. What we've done, all of us own land individually. But as a cooperative, we lease 20 acres of vegetable land from one of our farmers. And that's where we as a cooperative produce and grow. And from that, we've been able to get a $170,000 contract with the state of Alabama with their local food purchasing program. And we've also been able to get a $180,000 grant through the Federation to buy equipment and to install some infrastructure. So with the land part, we don't necessarily own land, but we do own a lot of equipment and some infrastructure. We're also, installing infrastructure at our 20-acre site, but also we'll be doing infrastructure. There's 10 farmers in our cooperative, and probably 7 out of the 10 actually own land and have their own farm site. And we grow on our individual site and aggregate the vegetables on the 20-acre site, where we have our infrastructure facilities and where we're building that. And so even when you look at land ownership, cooperative ownership goes even beyond the land, because we have a lot of equipment. We have about $150,000 worth of equipment right now that's actually owned by the cooperative. We don't own the land, but we actually own the equipment. And so if we were to ever, dissolve or dismantle our co-op, then, we'd have to make a decision about that equipment, that ownership as well. So, I know this is about collective land, but there's also some other things that that co-ops own and share and have some responsibility for. And so I just wanted to add that little piece.
Excellent. Thank you, Collie.
You know, and then I'll say this, because the original co-op that my dad started years ago, we purchased land. So it was a Harris County Farmers Cooperative. And actually, we're going through a legal battle right now. Turn it off. Going through a legal battle right now over that land ownership. The original farmers organized as the Harris County Farmers Cooperative, and they purchased 6 acres of land. But because everyone weren't farmers and were not from Harris County, that's when they reorganized as the West Georgia Cooperative Association. But they always left the land in the name of the Harris County Farmers Cooperative, because that's the organization that people invested their property in. And it stayed that way. And the West Georgia Cooperative Association was allowed to use that land, that property, for the last 60 years, because as long as we paid the taxes and all the bills, water bill, light bill, things of that nature, we could always use the land. A few years ago, some new members came on, and they organized a West Georgia Farmers Cooperative. And what they tried to do was say that the stock that the people invested in years ago is no longer transferable as heirs property, and that those people's investment 60 years ago is no longer valid. And so right now we're going through a legal battle over the ownership of that property, because it's not owned by the people who call themselves changing the bylaw. It's owned by the heirs of the original cooperative and things. And so I look at what my father and some of the other original co-op members did by preserving that property, by leaving it in the name of the Harris County Farmers Cooperative and the original investors, and honoring those investors. But like I say, you do have people that come in that don't know the history and try and change things to to really eliminate people's ownership and shares. So, and I'll say that because it was organized as a cooperative, and all of those legal documents that was organized are in state record, then we as heirs of the property have very strong, is in a very strong position to own the property. And so I'll say that the cooperative model, from that standpoint, from their ownership, has helped us.
So I see there was this question that, is it Lise mentioned about co-op ownership of farmland and corporate and limitations on. So this is a question that we are not, like, there are in Minnesota, for example, like, I don't know the details of the laws in Minnesota, but I can tell you that there are cooperatively owned farms in Minnesota. And I don't know, one of the things that is happens in the co-op space is that sometimes people choose, in terms of how they decide to, like, incorporate at their, become a legal entity at their state level. In the co-op universe, people are creative in order to kind of achieve overall the ends that they want. And so there are a lot of examples based on either because there's limitations in the state statute where you are, and this is not even related to farmland ownership, but where a group of people want to do something, they want to function as a co-op, they're going to write bylaws, operating agreements, etc. But for reasons, various reasons, they ultimately, they file as an LLC, right? And then but that LLC in practice very much functions like a cooperative, or exactly like a co-op. And so there are ways that's, I mean, I think so it'd be, a lot of it would depend on what are the nuances of the laws in your state, and then what are the ways that you accomplish what you want to accomplish. I see Rachel Armstrong on here, so perhaps this is another like thing we can do. We've done some work with farm commons in the past. This could be an area of joint exploration. So yeah, there are, I mean, I would say it's not that there are no hurdles. I don't see these necessarily being like, oh, there's a law about corporate owner farmland, we're done, you know, it's not possible. I will say that I know that there's also laws around, a lot of states in the Midwest have laws around, you know, corporate ownership of farmland, and it's not like complete bans, but there are, you know, various limitations, nuances. And I will say, I know, I mean, I don't know if Hannah is on this call. I think I've seen so Hannah Breckbill, Humble Hands Harvest in Iowa. I know she has joined these conversations in the past. Humble Hands Harvest is an example of a group functioning very much like a worker-owned cooperative farm, on paper formed as an LLC. And she led, and she mentioned this in one of the first calls I joined of this group. So there's a model, a newish kind of co-op model, that's, people call them REICs, real estate investment cooperatives, or just, and it's where basically a group of people forms a co-op with the purpose of purchasing some sort of, oftentimes it's in the context of downtown revitalization. That's where a lot of the current examples exist. But it's a community, it's a form of cooperative community ownership of a kind of a physical asset that they make decisions about development and renting out and or reselling. And there's a group in Iowa, Farmers Land Investment Co-op, that is, you know, they're new, but trying to apply that same example to farmland. So they're trying to pool financial resources from a group of people. They've decided to govern, you know, form and govern themselves cooperatively, but then to pool capital to be able to take advantage of, if there's, you know, farmland opportunities for purchase, to be ready. And then, you know, they may still be working on their vision. How would we then like lease that out, you know, use it as a vehicle ultimately for farmland access? But so there are, I don't know the legal nuances of how people are kind of working with or around some of these laws, but I think it's possible.
And feel free to skip over my questions.
Oh,
now
so
if you have
I
other
don't,
things
is
to
the
attend to.
CLT cap, is that something that's legal? So this is where like my limited understanding of community land trusts is that something that's baked into the like kind of whatever legal framework around land trusts, or that's just like a practice thing?
Ooh, I think that is kind of one of the foundational principles there. But I'm also not an expert, so I don't feel like I should weigh in too much.
So in the housing space, taking this limited equity housing co-op model and then potentially applying it to something like farmland, that it's not baked into any sort of legal framework. I think that the idea, it's kind of a mutually agreed upon thing by the co-op, and limited equity housing co-ops don't, you know, the amount of limited gain may vary, right? But a lot of it, what it is ultimately tied to is limitation. Like if there's there are a number of federal programs, some with HUD and some in other, that help subsidize development of cooperative housing. And there are requirements in those programs about the like equity, you know, in order to qualify for financing through these programs, there are caps on like, and if you're a market rate housing co-op, then you don't not accept or eligible for the same program. So I think sometimes where the limitations are in the gain in equity or gain in value are tied to the participation in some of these financing programs with the federal government. But otherwise it's like the group, just the co-op itself's desire to remain, you know, affordable long-term. And so they just at the outset agreed to essentially a formula about rate of gain of value that's below market rate.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
All right. Yes, thank you, Kelly. Appreciate that. So Kelly, do you have any like insight or like any particular focus you think the group should know or take away from this conversation as we continue to transition on?
I don't know. I mean, I think, I mean, some of it is just like, it sounds like certainly there's work to do for us to lay out some clear paths for how this would be accomplished in different states so that, you know, if there's a group of handful of farmers wanting to maybe try this out, they're not like navigating the legal nuances and other things completely on their own. So, but also I think as for folks who are, you know, in your day to day, like focused on helping get people, you know, on land, farmers on land, what are the how do we facilitate conversations with groups of people that set them up to be successful when they are ultimately working together or working collectively, whether it's because they've decided on some sort of co-op model or something else, right? That like thinking about the importance of that group cohesion and group agreements, you know, the writing of things down, documentation over years, like Collie alluded to, that like, you know, we even you know, a group of 5 beginning farmers that all want to, you know, have similar kinds of farming operations or whatever, right? Like we might assume more commonality than exists. And so understanding like, how do we bring together the right groups of people to be farming on land together and that set them up for success, right? Understanding that there's good fits with people. We all know this. We all work in organizations where you're like, and it's, you know, there are good fits and there are not good fits. And sometimes, you know, you can have structures in place that help navigate even the not good fits, but it's, you know, we want, if we're going to be talking in spaces with beginning farmers and there's talk about this being collectively on land, like what are the steps that folks should, the conversations that people should have, and the steps that we kind of help groups go through to decide, like, are we a good group of people to be together on a common piece of land?
Well, thank you. So that also speaks to as we look at that group, we've spoken about like there's always going to be conflict when you're bringing people together. Collie, what insight do you have, or you can bring into focus around your work and experience in cooperative farming and agriculture, and some of those conflicts, and some of like, you know, even that collectively coming on land, like mitigation of risk and different things of that nature. Even as you mentioned earlier, there was some story hidden in there around how the land was really kind of protected as well. So could you go ahead and lead us through your thoughts on that, please?
You know, I'll say, you know, probably the biggest part is that the reason why you're coming together as a cooperative is for economic purposes. And I think we sometimes lose focus on that part, especially if challenges begin to arise. And I think we need to start looking at how do we put that in the forefront and keep that as our focus. For example, if 5 farmers are coming together to purchase 5 acres of land, what does it look like for each one of those farmers economically to benefit from being in a cooperative on those 5 acres? And what does that roadmap look like? You know, what does that financial statement looks like? Can you take that to a bank somewhere and get it financed? And I think that's a lot of challenges. You know, that was one of the things that I was able to do with our co-op in Alabama, was that and to get funding from the state and from the federation, was a co-op business plan, and where we came together to rent those 20 acres of land. And what was, you know, we just started out with farming on 5 acres, but our goals was to expand to those 15 and include those other 15 acres. And but we had a business plan that showed, you know, in 5 years how much funding we would make each year based off of the production of those 5 acres. But, you know, that was us collectively and not necessarily individually. But I think and our goal was to put together a co-op business plan of 10 individual farm plans. And each one of our individual farm plans included the farming that we was doing as part of the cooperative. And so with a co-ops being an economic engine, I think we always have to start putting that in the forefront and letting people know. You know, I look at getting young people into agriculture, into farming. You know, where's the money? You know, how do you make money off of farming when, you know, you have to have $500,000 just to get started in conventional farming? So how do you start with 2 or 3 acres and things and show that you can make a living, you know, off of that? And so, you know, the co-op model is always about, and always have been about, people coming together to benefit economically, individually, but working together collectively. And so that's what the co-op model is about. So I'll say, let's always keep the economic piece in the forefront. And if everybody is going toward that economic goal, then we know what our share of that economic goal is, then I think that it helps people get past some of the issues and the problems that arises before you get to that point. And so I'll start with that piece. But yeah, you know, it's about economics, so let's always have the numbers there.
Okay, thank you. And so this is for both of you all, and then I'll ping pong to Kelly real quick. Is, you know, we've talked about governance models, and what are your perspectives on that reduction in risk and taking access to land and whether as a cooperative versus as an individual, and how the co-ops can benefit individuals of like mitigating or reducing risk. So Kelly, could you speak to that? And then as Collie, could you follow up with her and speak into that as well?
Yes, for me, the risk reduction is just that it's not, in terms of financing a purchase of whether it's land, you know, equipment, infrastructure, it's not all, you're not laying everything out there yourself. You know, we say with co-ops, there's shared risk, shared reward, right? So it's, you know, you pool capital together, so potentially less of your own individual capital is on the line. You know, I think one of the things that I see, you know, with some co-ops that I'm working with that, you know, not in the land access space, but kind of in the agriculture space. I've been working with a couple meat processing groups in the last few years, and they have seen that there's a lot of, you know, there's generally a positive association in the world with the notion of cooperatives and cooperation, right? And that people are capitalizing on that and doing crowdfunding and getting decent support, crowdfunding support for whatever their cooperative enterprise is, like in startup is like aspiring to be. And so then that's like, even, you know, in terms of like pooling capital for startup, that's even more, you know, more way that the risk is kind of like spread or mitigated, right? Because you're using some capital that is not even, you know, originally yours. So yeah, I don't know that I have anything that's fancier to say than that, but that we know that starting a business of any sort and putting a lot of capital on the line, equity on the line, is, you know, you leverage yourself pretty significantly sometimes. And then if you can leverage yourself less and your personal assets less, then maybe, you know, you can use some of those assets for other things, other types of investment, perhaps. Yeah, I don't know if I have anything else to add there, yep. Gary, but.
Okay, thank you. Collie?
Yes, I'll just add, you know, I use the co-op model for grant writing purposes. It's for individual farmers. It's hard to get a grant for individual farm business, and that's a challenge. But you can always, you know, if you have a good business plan, you can always get a farm loan through FSA, and those organizations now are willing to loan small farmers funding. But I've had success in organizing as our cooperative and being able to write, to write grants, and some of them have been fairly successful. Our business plan has been successful, and like I said, in the last couple of years, well, 4 years, just with our Alabama co-op, we raised, like I said, close to $500,000 in contracts and equipment and small grants and things. So, so that's the the model that we use to reduce our risk, and we even get seed, fertilizer, irrigation equipment. We have partnerships with Tuskegee University that's putting in 5 acres of irrigation for us that we don't have to spend out of our pocket. If we were an individual farmer, it would be difficult for Tuskegee to do that. But as a cooperative, they're able to partner with us. And so with our co-op, like I said, we're able to establish relationships with the State Department of Agriculture in Alabama, with Tuskegee University, Auburn University. We're meeting with Airmark, distributors that work with a lot of universities. So I see the benefits in, like I said, I'm working together as a cooperative and reducing your individual risk. And the benefits, we have a timesheet, a time card where, the amount of time you put on the farm, you get compensated for that. And, at the end of the year, we'll do, some dividends. But right now we're just leaving all our funding in our account because our farmers, we're all in good shape just by being a member of the co-op. We get things for our individual farm as well as our co-op. And so, I can see where it has reduced a lot of our individual risk. And with the vegetables that we grow on our individual farm, we aggregate those with our co-op vegetables, and we have a good contract with the state of Alabama with their local food purchasing program, which is a food bank. We supply produce for 3 different food banks in Alabama, and they take all that we can produce, and we get a really good price.
Okay, thank you, Collie. I'm going to transition to Katie to head us out. And Collie, there is a question in the chat real quick. And I think we've had this conversation about business plan and cooperative farming. So there is a request. Would you be able to share a cooperative business plan with us to learn from? And I know we've talked about building out a cooperative curriculum, et cetera. So do you have anything there that you may be able to support this person with that we can share in our resources later?
Yes, I don't mind sharing. There's a couple of business plans. There was a SARE grant that I wrote with a group of African farmers in Minnesota. It was African Women's Backyard Farming Project. It was a North Central SARE grant, probably 15, 20 years ago, but we put together the co-op farm plan, a business plan. But I have the one that I'm using here in Alabama that's based off of that same business plan, but it's been updated some. So yes, I'm willing to share and help people out with with putting business plans together, as well as co-op plans, grants as well. I do have some experience in writing grants around cooperatives.
Okay, thank you. Katie?
Yeah, thanks so much, all 3 of you. Any other questions, either in the chat or feel free to unmute and share?
And I will say on the business plan question, I know we're in the fall, Renewing the Countryside will be offering up. It'll be urban ag business planning, just adapting to expose, prepare, and ready farmers and growers in urban spaces to utilize USDA programs and be loan ready. So that could also be a starting point on building out a business plan that could be adapted. As Collie mentioned, there was A number of different farmers shared the land, and each one of them had a plan. So that's something to think about. We have a hand up.
I have a really, really general question, and you've kind of touched on it in your conversations, but just as the difficult, how co-ops require a lot of cooperation, and it's not necessarily conducive as, you know, people in our society don't do that easily always. And you've mentioned there's almost always, when you get people together, there's conflicts. Are there like, I don't know, are there, that's the scary thing about going into cooperative, I guess, especially if you've had a bad experience in one, which has happened in our area with various things, you know, where you get together and it just doesn't work because of those kind of personalities and sort of societal expectations of how we work together and who gets to benefit. Do you have any suggestions just on that level of how to sort of bring, there is a positive impression of co-ops, but they're hard work. And how do you bring that into the, where it's worth it for people, where, you know, where that, you know, you going it together is better than going it alone?
I think a lot of it, and I'll just jump in real quick, is it comes to relationships, and then is being able to work through conflict resolution as well, being intentional, and that being part of that when we talked about principle 5, that co-op education. Part of that, once you get together and once you get going, you got to continue to work at it, you know. And with any relationship, it takes work. It's not going to come easy. And then it comes back down to what Kelly said too, about getting the right people on the land. It's getting the right people with the right intentions as well to become members and to buy in to what you're doing.
And I would say, you know, Gary and Collie and I, we're all part of a national network of co-op development centers. That, I mean, there are a lot of different organizations that bring co-op developers together. But there's, and I can't recommend enough working. So many of the, I mean, every co-op development center takes different, you know, slightly different approach and has slightly different offerings. But like our co-op development center, one of the things that we as co-op developers like front load with groups and also offer on an ongoing basis is this director education, and a huge portion of like of the content of our like director education curriculum is like how to run a good meeting, like decision making tools and processes, right? Like, I mean, the stuff that's like, this was what like makes or breaks a group, and it doesn't, we don't learn it most of the time. You know, it's the kind of stuff that you learn if you like decide to invest in like really good facilitation training and courses or things like that, right? And so I spent a huge amount of time with groups like talking about that kind of stuff. How do you craft an agenda? Like, how does someone get it on the, you know, it's like, it's not sexy stuff, right? But it's like co-ops are known and notorious for having like meetings that never end, and like who wants to sit in 5-hour meetings, and you know, and so finding whether it's a co-op developer or someone who, you know, connecting a group early on with someone who will emphasize that piece of it with them, and I just say like everyone always has things to learn in this space, and you will never be done. And so like you come together because you're excited about what the co-op's proposing to do, right? You know, buy land, you know, open a grocery store, whatever. And then you need to plan in your mind to dedicate almost as much time to like, and how are we gonna like sit around a table and hash stuff out together? And be working with one or more and like seeking out the trainings and working with the people who have the expertise there. That's, you know, when I think about I support a wide range. I mean, I was not a meat processing expert, for example, right? Like, and I brought in the people who know meat processing for the meat processing co-ops I'm supporting. But what I do is make sure that these folks have like come to some of the trainings that we offer, and that I'm doing ongoing training with their board, and, you know, sitting in on meetings and offering suggestions. Yeah. And that just like from the get-go being like, this is going to be a place where everyone is going to have to learn always. And to the extent, and I mean, it's funny in my role, like someone has said that a more appropriate title would be co-op doula and therapist, which I feel like is true, because they are very hard things to birth. And then there's like always shit, right? Like, pardon my French, because it's people working together. And so, it's anticipating that like, yeah, there's stuff and that you have to anticipate that there'll be conflict and start talking early about like, how do we imagine we'll work through conflict, and then work with facilitators outside, people who can help the group remember that, like, even though personalities will be in play, like once you're a co-op, like it's not about the person, the individuals anymore. It's about like, well, what is it that the co-op needs? What is best for the co-op? And then pulling it away from the individual as much as possible. Anyways, so that's right. As a society, we aren't trained in this way. And so you just have to seek it out and like be really intentional from the start.
Collie, Gary, anything to add there? I love that orientation to process and collaboration infrastructure. I'm stealing that term from Michigan State. Any other questions? All right. Excellent. Well, I think we've plumbed some really great depths. I'm seeing lots of thanks coming into the chat. Thank you everyone for chiming in on the side. It looks like Gary shared a resource over there, so we'll make sure that's included in our notes along with the recording when we send that out in the next couple of weeks. I did want to highlight that the Farmland Access Hub has a landowner webinar 2-part series coming up in mid-August and mid-September. It's called Life After Farming, What's Next for You and Your Land. I'll go ahead and put the link in the chat for that. And we're really excited for this event, which is really sort of aimed at building this culture of thinking early about farmland succession planning and just really starting to, proactively think about that and just sort of build capacity for landowners to, start thinking in that way. So feel free to join us for that if that feels relevant or interesting. I imagine there will be some potential. There are always potential overlaps with cooperatives and collaboration there in that space. A couple of other notes. So we have Jean, who's on our call, is helping a large group of partners organize an Indigenous People Summit that's happening in mid-September in Omaha, Nebraska. We do, through our SARE grant, have a funding opportunity to support a couple of folks in this group to actually attend that conference in person. And so, Jean, maybe do you want to share a little bit more about that opportunity? And then we'll be emailing out details in the next couple of weeks. We're still kind of finalizing those, but yeah, Jean, I'll let you say anything else.
Sure. Thanks for mentioning it. And so we are, Agrarian Trust is working with the planning committee of the Indigenous People Summit, which is taking place in Omaha, Nebraska, September 13th this year. There's also going to be opportunities for a welcome dinner on Thursday the 12th as people come into town, and then on Thursday that Friday the 13th of September. I'll have to double check the dates. All of a sudden I want to check that. Auspicious day, right? And so and there'll be full day of sessions and panels. A lot of work around land access, of course, will be featured, but also Indigenous approaches to collective land ownership will be specifically highlighted. A number of different organizations with different models, such as the Winnebago Tribe, Ho-Chunk Inc. There will be members of the Omaha Nation as well, and members of the Iowa Nation will be present and sharing different models of collective ownership and some examples of land rematriation, also known as land back, a lot of examples from that movement. So we wanted to support at least a few people, particularly farmers or service providers who are working on land transition and looking at collective ownership models, support people being able to attend potentially that event, as well as doing an in-person event that we're still working out the details around. So, so I think that's it. Sorry, hopefully that was enough, just enough detail. There will be more. Hopefully that was enough to just get folks intrigued and checking out the summit. You can go to agrariantrust.org if you want to see our latest blog post about the summit, and we'll be updating that with more materials as the planning committee shares those with us.
Great. Thanks so much, Jean. I think that was an excellent teaser. We're going to be changing the narrative around Friday the 13th. I put in the chat. And it looks like we're already working on that. Yeah, anyway, so feel free to email me before we send out those details if you really feel like you'd be interested in attending, and we can keep you in mind and keep you posted as those details come together. Otherwise, our next meeting will be at August 27th, I believe. That'll be our last meeting of this group officially, but we do have all of the recordings posted in a playlist on YouTube. So these will kind of be living resources available after that. And there will be sort of ongoing opportunities for engagement. I think our group is dwindling, and I'll give 5 minutes back to everyone, but it looks like there are some great things coming into the chat. So I'll just leave it open for a couple more minutes and say thank you so much to everyone. Feel free to email me at Katie. Just put it in the chat there with any questions that you might have. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your summer. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks about